Have you ever found yourself doubting whether you should say I've been doing or I've done? Do they both sound correct in some situations? Then join me in this lesson for 4 tips that will help you to decide between I've been doing and I've done easily every time. Hello and welcome everyone. This is Minoo at Anglo-Link. Right, let's start by answering a frequently asked question. What's the difference between 1. I've been living here for 5 years and 2. I've lived here for 5 years? Here are some answers for you to choose from. A. There is no difference. B. 1 means that I still live here. 2 means I lived here in the past, but not now. And C. 1 means that I still live here, and 2 means I've just stopped living here. Okay, some of you may be surprised that the correct answer is A. There is no difference. They both mean that you started living here 5 years ago and you're still living here. I can hear you say, but they must be different. I've lived is the present perfect simple tense and refers to a completed action in the past at an unspecified time. I've been living is the present perfect continuous tense and refers to an action that started in the past and continues until now. And you would be absolutely right. But there is another point you have to think about. Is live an action verb or a state verb? As you know, if it's a state verb, we cannot use it in a continuous tense. Now I can imagine most of you are saying live is of course an action verb. So the correct sentence is I've been living here for 5 years. Well, you're right again. Live is, grammatically speaking, an action verb. However, in the specific context of living long-term in the same place, it can also be considered a state verb, a little bit like exist. That's why a native speaker would instinctively know that they can say either I've been living here for 5 years or I've lived here for 5 years to express the same idea. And live is not the only verb that this can happen to. Other action verbs such as work, smoke, collect, that are related to long-term facts or habits are also sometimes treated as a state verb. You may hear, I've collected stamps since I was 11, instead of I've been collecting stamps since I was 11. So, how can you, without the native speaker instinct, decide which one to use when you want to express that something started in the past and continues until now? Not to worry, just follow these tips. Tip number 1. Make sure you know which verbs are pure state verbs and always use the present perfect simple with them. Some common ones are know, belong, and exist. So you must always say, I've known him for 20 years, or I've belonged to this group since May. Never, I've been knowing or I've been belonging. In case you aren't sure, I've put a link to a list of state verbs in the description box. Make sure you know the verbs that have 2 meanings, 1 action and 1 state. For example, have a car, meaning own a car, is a state verb. But have a shower, meaning take a shower, is an action verb. These are also on the list. Tip number 2. With all action verbs, use the present perfect continuous. You will always be correct. Say, I've been living here for 5 years. I've been playing the piano since I was 5. And don't get confused if you hear a native speaker say, I've lived here for 5 years, or I've played the piano since I was 5. You now know that they're treating an action verb like a state verb because in that specific context, it feels like a state to them. Now let's look at another situation, and that's when the action has just stopped. You may have heard native speakers use I've been doing for an action that stopped a few minutes ago. Well, if 3 conditions come together, you must use the present perfect continuous instead of the present perfect. Condition number 1. The action was in progress for some time. Secondly, the action stopped a short time ago. And third, and most importantly, you are able to observe and comment on the result of that action. For example, you're working in the garden and the doorbell rings. You stop and answer the door. You can say to your visitor, "Sorry, my hands are dirty. I've been working in the garden." You may or may not continue to work in the garden after the interruption. That doesn't matter. Another common example of this is the question, "Why are your eyes red? Have you been crying?" Not, "Have you cried?" If you want more examples of how this tense is used in this context, read the famous children's story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I've put a link to it in the description box. And finally, tip number 4, what to do with negative sentences. It depends. You don't often see the present perfect continuous in a negative sentence, because it's strange to insist on the continuity of an action that never happened. For example, if there is no rain this morning, you would say, "It hasn't rained this morning," present perfect, not "It hasn't been raining this morning." The only time you would see the present perfect continuous in the negative form is when the negation is about the information contained in the sentence rather than the verb itself. For example, you could say, "I haven't been studying maths, but science." Or, "I haven't been feeling too well today," meaning I've been feeling unwell. Well, I hope these tips have answered all your doubts and you now feel confident that you know when to use "I've been doing" and when to use "I've done" instead. If you're still a bit uncertain, I have 2 lessons you can watch for a better understanding of the 2 tenses. This one explains the differences between the present perfect and the present perfect continuous, and this one is about state verbs and action verbs. After you watched these 2 lessons, you can come back and review these 4 tips. And you can find more explanations and exercises on my website too. Thanks a lot for watching and see you in my next lesson. Bye now!